roundtable discussion, election season in the Eastern Partnership region, a window for change and reforms, with a hopeful question mark that we would like to raise for today. Today's discussion marks a beginning of a new joint project that we have the pleasure to start in partnership with Analytical Center on Globalization and Regional Cooperation, who are hosting us today, based in Armenia, as well as Institute for European Policies and Reforms from Moldova, and we, the Georgian Institute of Politics from Georgia. The project, named Eastern Partnership Cooperation for Stronger Democracy, Georgia, Moldova, and Armenia, is supported by the Netherlands Fund for Regional Partnership, MATRA, for regional cooperation in the Eastern Partnership. And throughout the year, we will have a series of publications and roundtable discussions looking at various aspects of democratization in these three countries and the challenges related to it. But most importantly, we want to learn more about the steps taken to overcome them, learn from each other's experience, share what is happening in the Eastern Partnership, looking at it as more than just technical integration to the EU, but more an ongoing process of reforms and the change in the societies in Georgia, Moldova, and Armenia. And to begin our today's discussion, I would firstly like to ask the directors of the three partner organizations to say the opening remarks, and starting with Stepan Grigorian, who is our today's host and who is the chairman of the board of the Analytical Center on Globalization and Regional Cooperation. Dear Stepan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear friends, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank you for your participation in our event with our partners, Georgian Institute of Politics and Institute for European Policies and Reforms from Moldova. We are implementing a project, Eastern Partnership Cooperation for Stronger Democracy, Georgia, Moldova, and Armenia. And Renata said about this. The project benefits support from the Netherlands Fund for Regional Partnerships, MATRA, for regional cooperation in the Eastern Partnership. And I want to say my gratefulness to Carneli, to Renata, and Julian for our cooperation. In 2020, in 2020-2021, Georgia, Moldova, and Armenia held elections. This is the first thematic workshop in the framework of the project, which will be followed by thematic policy papers and blogs on post-election situation in our countries, and will analyze parallels. Our distinguished speakers will analyze aspects connecting with electoral reforms and electoral processes. This experiencing change and comparisons are very important for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to give word next to Julian Groza, our partner from IPRE. If I just don't see him on the screen. Dear Julian, are you with us? Well, having online events is both opportunity and challenge, as we are all probably used to it. And while Julian is getting reconnected, then I would like to invite Corneli Cacacia, Director of GIP.
Good afternoon. Let me welcome you also on behalf of Georgian Institute of Politics. We are very happy to cooperate with our Armenian and Moldovan colleagues with this project, which is sponsored by MATRA project, which is supported by Dutch Foreign Ministry. And this is very important. This project is very important in many ways because, as you know, EU-EAP relations, I would say, in a difficult situation right now because of many other things, including pandemic and some other issues. And as you know, there was not even possible to hold the EAP summit because of many other reasons you know better. So it actually puts these countries a little bit in difficult situation, but it doesn't mean that we should not really address the issues which is important for EU as well as the region. And one of these issues are, of course, the promotion of democracy and elections. And this is a very important issue for three countries and generally for whole region, which is in very difficult situation because of many events from last year over the Nagorno-Karabakh, and this year some because of the events in Belarus, which became kind of challenge for EU as well as EAP countries. Having said that, also when we talk about the EU and EAP relations, that sometimes we maybe pay too much attention to technical issues. Of course, we understand, especially for Moldovans and Georgians and Ukrainians, this is very important because we associated countries, but we should also not take this, homework as only technical matters. And I think that another important thing which actually unites with this region with the EU is the democracy and democracy promotion, which was and used to be the very important instrument in EU a long time ago. I think in that sense, today's event is very important, and I think we will have a very interesting views from three countries, basically how the things are evolving around elections and democracy in general. What's the situation in EAP countries? I think this is a very timely discussion, and this is the first series of discussion we actually launched together with our partners, and I hope we will have a very fruitful and very interesting discussion. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you.
And last but not least, I think Julian joined us again, and if he is here, no. Then, not to lose time, we will give him word later. He will be able to overcome technical difficulties. I would like to introduce our panel and our speakers of today, who represent the partnering countries and organizations. So today we have three presenters: Vardine Grigorian, who is Democracy Monitoring and Reporting Coordinator from Helsinki Citizens Assembly Vanadzor, from Armenia; Mihai Mogildea, Team Leader from the Europeanization Program, representing IPRE, Institute for European Policies and Reform, from Moldova; and Teona Zurabashvili, Junior Policy Analyst at GIP, who will talk about the Georgian case. Why we brought these three countries together and have the three presenters today. I think it was very important to compare the experiences of the Eastern Partnership countries, but also it happens so that all three countries have had snap elections or had plans of snap elections in the last year. So that will be additional flavor of today's discussion angle. And it seems that Julian is back. Julian, if you can connect to us, I would like to give you a word.
Thank you, Renata. Thank you very much, Corneli, everyone who is here with us. My connection is quite unstable, so I'll try to be brief say a few words just at the beginning and say how I'm happy that we start this project with this event. Indeed, elections are a commonality in the region. We have many things in common, many challenges as well. We will talk today about elections, the results of elections and expectations from these elections. Mihai, my colleague, will go into more details about the Moldovan case, which I think is quite unique. It is really about a process of building up an agenda that is in fact addressing real issues, internal agenda, internal division, which the country has been faced with for years because politicians were trying to use geopolitics a lot to propagate the agenda, but not doing many things internally. And this is why our democracies have been challenged from outside and from inside. So I'm really happy that we started this event today with elections, and we will of course go into more details when I will talk about integrity, inclusion, and justice during our next events. But I just want to say that I'm really looking forward to the debate, for the discussions today. I think it's a good initiative which is going beyond the associated countries that are represented here by Moldova and Georgia, going to Armenia. And I think this also proves is working, and I hope that will provide evidence and some suggestions at the same time for policymakers, but also for institutions, what we can do together so that we can bring our countries closer to the European Union. Of course, and the speed of our countries, which some maybe are different in terms of, but in any ways, I think we all aspire for the same, for a democratic society, which is based on the rule of law. And I hope that today's discussion would provide first inputs and first insights to our reflections that we start within this project, with this regional project. And I'm really happy that this project is supported by the Dutch government, which of course proves a great attention beyond the cooperations we have within our countries. And I think this regional approach is, I hope, would provide more opportunities to build bridges, policy bridges, and exchanges that we can do among our countries. Thank you. Looking forward for the discussions. Thank you, Renata.
Thank you. I can only agree. Well, today we will start our discussion and presentations from Armenian case, which is only fitting since the elections there was held not that long ago on 20th of June. It was much debated what this might mean for the continuation of electoral reform, on which there seemed to be a broad consensus, right? Both political and it was supported from the society, which helped to implement some changes in the electoral reforms right before the election campaigns. However, there have been questions by expert community as well, whether the election reform can really be effective and implemented in such a short period of time. This is very similar question that's being asked in Georgia as well. So I will be very interested to hear our today's speaker, Vardine Grigorian. Before giving her floor, I would like to encourage the participants, attendees to be active and involved. Please feel free to write your comments, questions, either in a chat or Q&A. We will read them, we will follow them as the discussion is ongoing. And we will have some time for answering them and raising them out loud after the three presentations. So Vardine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to share our experience here. If I could share just a tiny cheat sheet, that would be good. Otherwise, I can just open it for myself. I'll try. Yep. It probably won't be understandable, but it's just for me to kind of lead the process. Yeah. A very pathetic way, I guess, to say is you never know what you're getting into until you step in. I feel like this could really describe our experience of the reform when we started off with some, okay, there's like, we know the major changes that we want to make, and this is all we need to do. And then as we got into the process, as we got into the legislation, it turned out that there's a lot of things that need to be fixed, a lot of tiny technical or major things that are all interconnected, all need to be changed. And it seems that it's a process that is never going to end. And this is, to me, this electoral process and electoral reforms are kind of the actual diagnosis of how a country evolves, especially when we look at it from the independence perspective. And I feel like this is repeating what we see in all the other countries that all our Eastern Partnership countries, where we constantly think that it's unique to us, but then we actually see that the processes, the challenges, the solutions that former governments found are the ones that we see problematic and are the ones that we're trying to overcome. So it seems like it's a process that, and it's a like chain of mistakes that everyone goes through, and then we just grow together through these experiences. Here's kind of like a short list of legislation that we had on the elections. The first one was the law on the elections of a president. It was 1991, basically was used for only one elections. Then we had the law for National Assembly. Before that, we had the law for the Soviet law for, it was General Assembly or something like that, it was called. And then in 1996, again, we had another law that was, that basically was used for 2 elections. So if you look at kind of this timeline, it seems that we had changing the law and elections back to back. Constantly, they were following each other. Then we first had the electoral code in 1999. Then we had several elections with this legislation, and then we had 2 more electoral codes. And then this third one is basically the one that we're struggling with. And it seems that it's only political, but then it's actually kind of the outside shell that is political. There is also a lot of technical issues in the legislation that we probably dwelt too much on. And then as we came closer to the snap elections, or the snap elections fell on us, we realized that we hadn't finished all the technical aspects that needed to be done before the law would be adopted. I wanted to share with you kind of the timeline of how it was supposed to go. In 2018, after the revolution, there was a promise from the government that the reforms would take place, and the major concern that was shared by everyone was the regional lists. They were calling also rating system, but it's not actually a rating system. It's just the regional lists that are being used and that allow for basically local authorities or local tycoons, like business tycoons and others, take over. So it basically makes the purely political parliamentary elections very apolitical, making it into business competition where, of course, politics doesn't have any place. So eventually, we were trying to work with the government to get rid of that system. The expectations of in 2018 of changes were not so high because of the time frame, but the adoption of this fell short of 1 vote, and it wasn't adopted. So the 2018 elections were held with the former system of semi-proportional elections. And then basically following this process, the promise again from the government was that the reforms will take place. And a working group was formed in the parliament. We as civil society organizations were in the kind of capacity of consultants to this group. And we started working together on the law of political parties. The plan was to work on the law on political parties, then have the changes in the electoral code on local elections, because the elections would be taking place sooner. And then there would be constitutional changes followed by electoral changes for the parliament. Basically, the law on political parties was changed later than planned, or adopted later than planned, because of the war and because of COVID and all the delays with that. But still, it's already in force. Most of it, its actual provisions will come in force next year, but still a lot of it has already been in place. And then the local election part was adopted in May 2020. But what I wanted to say about that part is, I think one of the shortcomings of this process, at least here in Armenia, was that there was a disconnect between this working group and what the government was doing. So in this case, when it came to the local government elections, the Ministry of Regional Development was actually working independently on its draft without consulting or considering what the working group in the parliament was doing. And then they came up with their draft on just the local elections, which of course had a lot to do with the rest of the code, especially with the administration of elections and with the general provisions that would be applicable to both local elections and national elections. So this was kind of the disconnect that made these changes really incomplete. And then the reform process, as it continued with the National Assembly, had also to address local elections in the future, adding the provisions that were not there included by the ministry. Then what we had in 2020, of course, I wouldn't even find words to describe, but through that process, the working group was still trying to make the changes, but it seemed that because of the political situation, you could see that there was the consensus that was there before, the consensus with which the law on political parties was adopted, and with which this local election component was adopted, was not there. And the consensus was not about the substance of the changes, but just the eagerness to disagree with the government and to play opposition. And eventually in 2021, when the snap elections were announced, the ruling party was the only one that basically was going to vote for the changes. And there was even some concern from them that they shouldn't adopt the changes simply because there is the general good practice of not changing the law a year before the elections. But the thing is, this particular change of proportional system was proposed and promoted since basically when the code was adopted originally in 2016. So this was not new, this was not unexpected. And especially after the elections, after the revolution, everybody was sure that the next elections are going to be with a full proportional, plain proportional system. So it was actually unexpected if the government did a U-turn and decided to go with the older code. And this was something that we were able to convey to the Prime Minister and to the government and the National Assembly, and they agreed to have at least that major change in the code before the elections would take place. Again, because this is so political, the president basically decided not to sign the law. It would come into force in 3 weeks, even if he didn't sign, because he didn't complain about it in the constitutional court, but it still kind of delayed the process, and it made it unclear how the elections would be held. Then the package of reforms was basically divided into 3 parts. One was the part that was adopted. The second one was the part about responsibility, about administrative and criminal liability for different electoral violations. These were also adopted end of April, and they did go into force before the elections. But then the last part, like the bigger part, was adopted, but it did not go into force. And it will go into force gradually. Some provisions will apply to the local government elections, and then most of the provisions will go into force next year, hopefully making the elections easier. But then again, what we saw was it seems that civil society is a lot more ambitious, or maybe it is always. Civil society is a lot more ambitious than governments are, and governments are always cautious. In this case, or okay, maybe like the governments who have good intentions probably are cautious. The governments who don't have good intentions just probably don't listen to civil society at all. So the ones that, in our case, they're really cautious of making mistakes. And it seems that the fact that they're so cautious about it, everything that is happening with reforms and changes is definitely hindering the process of reforms in a way that would be meaningful. We saw that we had very ambitious provisions there that we wanted to see in the legislation, but they were removed last minute, making it basically rendering these changes useless, some of the changes. And this is why I kind of titled this speech as not a one-time event, because I feel like the electoral reforms, even if the provisions that we wanted to have there, even if all of them actually appeared in the law, we still, after the elections, would see that there is a lot of things missing. And there would still be recommendations from the international community and from us speaking about how we basically don't, there were things that we oversaw, and there were things that we didn't calculate well, or there were things that were not manageable in a short period of time, or things that still need to be worked out. So it seems that this process is constantly a loop or like a spiral going up, where we see there's the different actors, and we see that whenever there is, let's say, more civil society involved working with National Assembly, there is always the electoral management bodies that will not be happy with it, or there is the extra-parliamentary parties or the parliamentary parties competing with each other, how and whose recommendations are passing. And then within this competition, you definitely lose some things, you gain some things. But what we saw was there was a political process, there was a genuine discussion before the war, and even during the pandemic, there was this genuine concern of how to make things better. And then as we came closer to the elections, it seems that the political environment was so tense and so selfish for all the political parties. It's like so egocentric for each of them that the political aspect was a lot stronger and was a lot more dominating for the process than the electoral reforms, than the genuine concern about having good elections. Then what we saw on the election day, now going into kind of as an observer, how we saw that. We saw that, of course, there's a lot of things that we would like to see in the process on the election day. We constantly were collecting the information about, like, you know, this is the change that we wanted to have. It did not pass, but if it was there, then this wouldn't happen. So it was the constant understanding that things could have been better, and that still we need to work on it. But definitely there was a lot more concern about the elections before them than what we saw on the election day. The election day was a lot more calmer than we expected. There was the concern that this would be similar to the elections we had in 2003 or even before. So the concern was that there was too much aggression, there was too much tension, that we don't know what's going to happen and how people and political parties will react to what is happening in the country. But then it turned out that it was much better. It was administered well. It was not as basically scary as we thought it would be. And then we also saw that, again, the kind of list that we had made before about what we need and what we need to have in the legislation was still valid. So this is what we're going to work on. And I wanted to say that for us, it's very important how the international community sees the process in Armenia, because the outsider's perspective is very important. We as civil society organizations are, and especially if we're kind of looking from the general perspective of civil society, we may not see the entire process and entire regulations as detailed as OSCE or other missions are able to see, but then combining the efforts and then putting them together and then actually making governments work definitely works at best. I'm really excited about finally seeing the ODIHR report and getting back to the reform process. Hopefully government has also learned from this experience of not being scared of last minute changes, but hopefully we won't have new reasons for last minute changes, but we will actually be able to go through the reforms in a manner that is more acceptable, that is more in line with good practices. Since my time is up, I'll just see if there's any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for keeping the time. This is great so that we can leave time for the questions and for discussion. It is great to hear that there is a competition for the recommendations and for pushing changes. That's of course also always more desirable than stagnation, even though we know that there are certain challenges that still need to be overcome. It will be a long process. I would like to now move then to Moldova. And here we also had snap parliamentary elections just a couple of weeks ago on July 11th. It seems it has changed the balance of power, with the incumbent president's Maya Sandu's party winning the elections. And since their platform is considered pro-European, there will be high expectations to push through a reform program intended to strengthen European integration. So I would like to ask, how much should we expect from the new party? And the floor is yours, Mihai. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. Hello to everyone, and I'm really happy to be with you today, this discussion, and I think it's quite good opportunity to discuss about maybe the similarities, maybe the challenges that all the three countries, Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia actually faced during the electoral process, and maybe the opportunities arising from the results of the electoral process and the elections in these three countries. I think that Moldova could be seen maybe as a good example for the Eastern Partnership region as a whole, in actually maybe delivering an electoral process that was assessed as being partially correct and valid. This meaning that although some issues have been identified during the electoral process with regard to some sectorial issues, overall, the elections that were held in July were correct. They were organized in a good manner by the national authorities, and the results actually brought maybe high expectations in the Moldovan society with regard to the reforms that need to be implemented in the next years. That's why my presentation is actually focusing both on the results of the elections, but mostly on how these results could actually bring a window of opportunity for strategic internal reforms, also for maybe the Europeanization process of Moldova and enhancing the EU-Moldova relations. So maybe I'll just, in the beginning, I'll make a few remarks regarding the results of the snap parliamentary elections, I think that our attendees, our guests, they already know the turnout of the elections, and that the Party of Action and Solidarity, led by in the past led by Maia Sandu, actually obtained quite a consistent victory during these elections. They obtained 52% of the votes, and actually got around 63% of the seats in the parliament, which actually offers them all the instruments to govern the country and to implement their electoral program. But I'll just stop and mention three very important aspects that maybe are for me the most relevant with regard to the results of the snap parliamentary elections. The first one is that although traditionally the electoral competition in Moldova has been widely influenced by a geopolitical confrontation between pro-European and pro-Russian parties, who through time have actually divided the electorate with their political platforms and geopolitical views, the relevance and the impact of geopolitical slogans for the outcome of the parliamentary elections was rather low and insignificant. Even if the Party of Action and Solidarity secured an important victory during these elections, the trigger maybe for their success was not the pro-European orientation of the party, or the maybe the view on the foreign policy of Moldova, but rather the strong anti-corruption and pro-justice reform messages that they sent to the public. And that's a very important aspect, because especially here in the region, we are sometimes already maybe a bit tired of this geopolitical confrontation between the parties. Some of them actually, some of them focusing only on this very narrow political debate over the foreign policy or over the foreign vision for the development of the country, and leave aside the internal issues, the key problems that the citizens actually face. And I think that right now in Moldova, for the second or the third time in the last 20 years, we got rid of this geopolitical debate, and PAS and maybe other pro-European parties actually focused their discourse on the internal issues of the country, and that's why the Party of Action and Solidarity, PAS, was perceived as a credible and honest party, because they didn't try to fool their electorate with some false problems, some false maybe threats to the national security, to the national to the independence of Moldova, and so on. The second issue here that I want to mention is that, of course, during these elections, we have observed a transfer of image from Maia Sandu to PAS. And I think that this transfer of image to some extent was crucial to ensure the victory of PAS during these elections. Some analysts even called these elections as being the first round of the presidential scrutiny that we had in October-November last year. To some extent, I think that PAS is still looking to consolidate their leadership and promote new leaders as part of the government and parliamentary majority that they are now holding. And probably this will happen in the next weeks, probably in the next months. And I think that to some extent also PAS benefited a lot from the president accomplished promise that she will take all the legal steps to trigger the snap parliamentary elections. And I think this promise that was made during her electoral campaign in the autumn of 2020 was accomplished. And of course, for the citizens of the country, for the citizens of Moldova who are tired of promises that were not put in place by the politicians, for the first time in a very short period of time, they actually saw that there is one leader who is going to keep her promises. And I think that because of that, the party won the last elections. And the third aspect that I want to mention is that, of course, PAS victory was also shaped by two very important social or electoral factors. The first one is the large participation of the diaspora, of the Moldovan diaspora, during the parliamentary elections, with more than 200,000 voters, is more than 2.5, more than 2.5. The participation was twice and a half bigger than during the last parliamentary elections in 2019. And the diaspora alone actually provided to PAS up to 15% of their parliamentary seats. It's a very important number. It's a very big number actually for this party. And of course, another reason was the so-called demobilization. A low participation of the traditional leftist pro-Russian electorate in these elections, especially in Chisinau, for example, or Gagauzia, which were two regions with a very important, actually, number of people usually voting for the pro-Russian, let's call them pro-Russian leftist parties here in Moldova. In Chisinau, for example, the voting turnout was 30% lower than in autumn 2020, and the votes that the party of socialists, the bloc of socialists and communists, led by the former president Igor Dodon, was 15% less than during the presidential elections. And of course, this aspect actually counted a lot because it was also a message sent to the former president that some of his electorate doesn't trust him anymore, and he's not perceived as being maybe an honest political leader. And I think that on short to medium term, Russia might actually look to invest in the image of another potential political leader and contestant to Maia Sandu here in Moldova. And now, just to move very briefly to the second part of my presentation, why these elections would represent a window of opportunity for strategic policy reforms in Moldova? Well, because PAS right now actually has the full control over the government and the majority in the parliament, so they can actually implement and follow their political program and ensure that their political promises are brought and are being accountable in front of the people. And I think that their electoral program, although it's ambitious and is looking to bring in front of the justice the kleptocrats and those who empowered the corrupt schemes in the last years, can be implemented to some extent if they will invest a lot of efforts, maybe in keeping accountable the ministers, keeping accountable the leaders of the governmental agencies, the leaders of the key security institutions in Moldova, anti-corruption institutions here in the country. And I think that under the leadership of Sandu and with the public pressure coming from their electorate, the civil society, mass media, the government will have to deliver results in the next maybe 1.5, 2 years, if they want to keep the same level of electoral support and trust across the country. Also, I believe that the new government will benefit from growing support and financial assistance from the external partners. Already the European Union and the United States announced their willingness to collaborate with the new government. I think that in the next months we'll assist to some negotiations and maybe the delivering of some assistance from the EU and the US. The European Union, for example, already announced a support program or a recovery program, actually, of 600 million euros for Moldova, which Moldova can benefit from in the next years. And I think that this assistance could be vital for the end results of these reforms. Because even if the main contribution to these reforms should come from inside the country, of course, you need the financial and the technical assistance to ensure the throughout implementation of them. And the third point that I want to make is that, of course, in the beginning there will be a high resistance from inside the system, especially in the justice and the anti-corruption institutions, maybe another key structures inside the country. There will be some resistance to the change of the power, but I think that this resistance could be shortened, or could be fight against if the government will begin to deliver results for the citizens, and will start actually to engage in a more vocal and more engaging maybe dialogue with the civil society partners, will ensure that at least at some level the discourse that they took, the discourse that was actually drafted before the elections, could ensure results in the next months. With that being said, I think that in Moldova there is actually a window of opportunity right now. It's not the first time when we see this situation. Of course, right now there are some the expectations from the society, of course, are very high, but I think there are some differences that we need to take into account. And the first one, of course, is that right now only one party has all the power, has all the instruments to actually deliver, and right now is only a few leaders coming from one party that will be accountable for the success or maybe the insuccess of the reforms that they want to implement. And I believe that the most important aspect here to mention is that at least for a short or maybe medium period of time, the internal political debate in Moldova is not anymore focused on geopolitics, but on what we need to do inside the country to actually advance our internal development. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to respond to your questions or maybe commentaries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mihai. So indeed, it seems that expectations are quite high and pressure is quite heavy on the newly elected government, and it will be very interesting to follow Moldova's developments in the near future. And now let's turn to the Georgia's case. Similarly to what Armenia has started, the electoral reform that is still being completed, so has Georgia, where electoral reform, the current phase of it, let's say, has started a year ago when threshold for entering parliament was lowered to 1%. Distribution of seats in the parliament was redesigned, among other changes. However, parliamentary elections have been disrupted midway in 2020 when opposition parties refused to take part in the second round, accusing the government for abusing their power to distort the outcome. And Georgia's politics has been in quite crisis since. And now a new agreement about electoral reform has been reached, but the political balance is very unstable, and it remains to be seen how these reforms will be implemented given the precarious situation as well as very little time left till the elections. So here I will give word to Teona to tell us more about the challenges in Georgia.
Thank you, Renata. Thank you. Yeah, I will share my PowerPoint if you don't mind. Yes. No, sorry. Do you see it? Okay. Well, sorry, something. Yeah, sorry. Well, I will start my presentation about the information about the new amendments. On June 28th, the Parliament of Georgia approved amendments to the election code. The electoral reform aims to prevent potential politicization of the election administration and boost the public trust towards the election process through the increasing number of opposition party and party representatives in the election administration, and the active involvement of civil society representatives in the process. If we look over the modern history of Georgia, it's apparent that the fragility of the electoral system represents critical issues that has caused many political crises in Georgia, and the low trust in public trust, low trust in election results mainly built up on two key factors: the mixed electoral system, that mainly because of the high number of majoritarian candidates that gave advantage for the ruling party, and the politicized election administration, because for ages all ruling parties have maintained their political leverage over administrations, and of course it caused the low trust towards the election results, and that's in overall caused the political crisis. I would like to mention that the electoral reform that adopted last month was not the first one which approved by the Georgian Parliament for the last couple of years, and the first one was adopted in 2020, and I would say that the ongoing reform is a sort of continuation of this reform, so that's why I think it would be better if I say couple of words about that. Actually, the amendments in the electoral code was envisaged by the constitutional amendments adopted 2017, and according to it, the country would transit from the mixed electoral system to the proportional one, and this electoral reform would be implemented after 2024. And however, the issue of the proportional electoral system sat on the Georgian political agenda in the summer of 2019, and you may be aware of the political event what's developed in this period. That's the Russian delegation's presence in the Georgian parliament triggered the mass demonstrations, and protesters were demanding the proportional electoral system. After 4 days protest, Georgian Dream announced that the parliamentary election 2020 will be fully proportional with zero electoral threshold. However, later they just backtracked it on its key promise to Tbilisi protest, and And only after several months, only after couple of round of negotiations with active and involvement of foreign ambassadors in it, the ruling Georgian party and the opposition could manage to reach a consensus over the electoral reform. And according to the memorandum of understanding, it was designed that Georgia's electoral system would be semi-proportional, and the electoral threshold for proportional elections would be fixed at 1% of the votes. And also it was designed sort of capping mechanisms in order to create a government. As for the electoral reform 2020-21, ambitious electoral reform, it was caused by the prolonged political crisis in Georgia that started actually the controversial election results, parliamentary election results 2020. And I have already mentioned that it was only one election that when the opposition has blamed the Central Election Administration in politicization, in doing in making the results in favor of government, but because of the scale of the political crisis, it caused much attention not only inside the country but also from the international society. And as a response of the ongoing crisis, European Council's President Charles Michel offered a proposal to the Georgian ruling and opposition parties. The proposal, among other important political issues, also included the Georgian government's commitment to conduct significant electoral reform. And I don't want, and also it envisaged changes in the Central Election Administration. And I don't want to exceed my time slot, so I just mentioned that this reform also envisaged changes in the high level of the election administration, and at the same time it comprised the changes in the lower level of the election administration, and also it envisages the rising in number of the opposition party representatives in the administration, as well as it envisages the sort of it envisages also a sort of democratic process, how to appoint them. And at the same time, it envisages the changes in the electoral system, and it envisages some changes in the procedures. For instance, the presence of the party representatives around 100 meters from the polling station is forbidden, and yes, from my expertise, I can say that the new electoral code comprised some improvements, but the new legislation does not impose any substantial changes, as it doesn't revise the established rules of games. And because I would like to, when it comes to the conclusion to what extent the new electoral code can impact or influence the upcoming local elections, I would like to discuss this issue in two contexts. The first is the sort of so-called technical issues that is related to the new electoral code per se, and the second one is the political will. Well, the first, I would like to say that the new electoral code still maintains the mixed electoral system. That means that the new electoral code does not ensure the proper representation of political parties, and also the capping mechanisms. We don't know. It seems at the first glance it seems as a democratic mechanism, but we all know that if the Central Election Administration's heads will not be elected by the parliament with the votes of 2/3, it means that the new head will hold the post only just 6 months, and as in 2 months we have local elections, it just makes the room for speculation that the government still remains to maintain political leverage on the upcoming election. And also 10 meters distance from the polling station cannot prevent potential intimidation of voters or vote buying, because we all know that such irregularities always happen prior to the election, not on the same days. And also the deadline for the complaints is still limited. As per the political will in transitional countries, based on the empirical evidences in transitional countries, the international donors and international society are always criticized by the scholars because they think that problems in transitional countries can be easily cured by the legal or technical intervention, while the problems per se are related to the political will. So when it comes to the potential impact of the electoral code to the upcoming elections, I would like to say that I'm not sure that the Georgian Dream have political will for substantial changes, because while I was preparing for the presentation, Georgian Dream just left the EU-mediated April 19th agreement, and also before that decision, the ruling party appointed judges to the country's Supreme Court before the implementation of the judicial reforms agreed upon the April 19th agreement as well. And also, I have already told you the story of the electoral reform 2020, when Georgian Dream did not fulfill their promise regarding the transition to the fully proportional electoral system. So this information give me an opportunity to say that the Georgian Dream are lacking or are reluctant to do real reforms in Georgia. So when it comes to the potential impact of the electoral code on the upcoming elections, I would like to make such concluding remarks, which I think it's not very promising, that without demonstrated credible intent of political actors, I think therefore reforms represent just the changes embodied in the respective documents, but not in practice. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tana. So this is quite a pessimistic assessment.
Yeah.
of the upcoming elections. And now I would like to open up the floor to comments and questions. There are two ways to do it. One, to write your comments and questions either in the chat or in the Q&A section. We see already several questions are there, more coming, I hope. And after the first round of written questions and comments, you can also use the function of raising a hand, and then we would give you an opportunity to ask your question live, verbally, so that we can unmute you. If you would desire to do so, please raise your hand and let it be known. Looking at the questions, they follow up nicely the discussions that have been the issues that have been raised by the speakers. The first question is to all the speakers, whom did people give their votes in your countries? Was it voting for political parties, for their programs, or just for the leaders? So that is one question to all the speakers. The second question is to Mihai, about the sustainability of the reforms. So you mentioned that elections in Moldova were organized and went overall quite well. And what could be done to ensure that this continues in the next elections? So how to avoid possible drawbacks that could occur in the future? The third question is to all panelists again, especially to those who spoke about the reforms of electoral system. Could you please elaborate a little more on whether these processes were inclusive, meaning how much civil society or parliamentary and non-parliamentary opposition was involved? Vardine, I think, mentioned that in her presentation, but if you would like to elaborate on that a little bit more, please go ahead. So maybe we will take these 3 questions and then we'll have a second round. Let's go in the same order as the presentations went. So I will give the first word to Vardine, and then Mihai, and then Theo.
Yes, thank you for the questions. The first one is actually, you said either or, but there is a third option in Armenia. It was in spite of. It wasn't for the political, for some, it was not for the political party or for a leader of the political party, but against the leader of the other forces, which were like the former presidents. So there were some estimates, actually some experts say it was the majority that voted this way, but the voter behavior survey we did on the election day shows that some like 10–15% of the population of the voters actually voted against a certain candidate, not for a candidate. And this includes those who voted against the current prime minister, or those who voted against the second president or the third president of the forces supporting them. So it basically was this interesting situation as well. But in general, most of them were actually speaking for the leader of the political party, who they expect everything from. And it seems that the fact that we have this very big list of political parties, and also we still have the alliances, and alliances are something that the working group on the electoral reforms has been discussing a lot, that political alliances are kind of this group of parties that do not share the same ideology. They come together spontaneously for an election, and then they fall apart, or they continue working together, but then it usually doesn't work out. And you usually don't see the ideology behind this force. What we were also sure about was that you cannot just change into a political proportional system and expect people to care about platforms immediately. This is also something that we're expecting for the local elections, that we changed it to the proportional system and political parties are going to get more involved, but it will take time. It will take probably a lot of time until political parties are kind of known and understood for who they are as an organization, as an entity, not who the leader is. In most cases, we see that if the leader leaves the party falls apart. And this is especially said in Armenia, where we have over 90 something, around 100 political parties. Probably some 20 or 25 of them are active, but then the rest are these one-man parties that are visible, that are participating in a lot of different events or a lot of debates, or are even trying to. In these elections, we had 26, 4 party alliances and 22 parties participating in the elections. One of them decided to withdraw, so it's basically 25 different entities that were competing, and it was obvious that in most of those cases, it's just one man that has gathered somehow 80 people to join him to run for the elections. It was ridiculous that even in some lists of candidates, we actually found duplicates. So they were running from different parties. And this is because there are so many, like, if you have to have at least 80 people in your candidate list to be able to participate in the elections, in such a small country, that's a huge number. And if 25 different political parties decide to run, then you get this really interesting cases. So it was different. It will take some time for the political parties to become really well-known, institutionalized, that when you say the name, you actually understand the ideology, and you think about the ideology before you think about the leader. It will still take time. And until that time, we will hopefully have also some kind of this electoral voter behavior or electoral history that will help us understand how different parties behave and what to expect of them when and if they're elected. As to the third question that was also to all of us, yes, this is very inclusive, but what I wanted to say is that I wish when we speak about inclusiveness and participation, we also pay attention to the fact that a lot of, when the opportunity is there, it seems that the interest from civil society, from different entities, political parties and others, the interest is about being included. It's not really about participation. So it seems that when we were doing the public hearings or discussions, there was a lot less interest, but then there would be a lot stronger disagreement and criticism if, for example, these meetings that we weren't held, or if these meetings weren't public or they weren't open to everyone. So there was, when it came to the substance, there was less interest, there was less participation, but the opportunity was there. And probably the opportunity is most important. And throughout a year and a half, basically, there were several discussions in the regions and in person, online, offline, where people were able to participate, starting from regular people to civil society, to parliamentary and extra-parliamentary parties. And it seemed that there were only 5 or 6 political parties that were genuinely involved in the process. And I'm very glad that most of those parties were actually sharing our view on the reforms. So it was very easy to work with them, and also they were very helpful in pushing civil society reforms in the process. So the trust that was put in civil society was very important in trying to push for the reforms and making sure that these reforms are ongoing and that in the future they will also be supportive of these changes. For example, when the snap elections were announced, and then there was this hesitance about adopting the changes or not, civil society and extra-parliamentary parties basically had one voice. Both of these groups released statements urging the government to adopt the changes. So it was very important.
All right, thank you. Mihai, would you like to take the floor?
Yeah, very shortly on all the, I think, 3 questions. The first one, I think the role of political leaders is quite high. I mean, not only in Moldova. If to speak about Moldova, I think here we have an interesting case in which basically, with the support of a leader, a party is born, and given the ignorance maybe and the low integrity of a leader, a party could be buried if the party doesn't deliver any reforms. In our history of 30 years of independence, we had a very low number of parties who you could call actually democratic, in a sense that even the party members have a word to say in the decisions taken by the party. And mostly the leaders are actually those who participate in the elections and actually bring the support of the electorate. We actually have this kind of this idea of maybe let's say the monopoly of the leader over the electorate, in a sense that he is the one or she is the one who is going to increase or decrease the popularity of the party. In this case, in the case of the last parliamentary elections, as I told you, I think that my son, who is currently leading the country, was the one who actually ensured to some extent the victory of her previous party. But in the same time, the former party, the former president Igor Dodon, is the one who actually succeeded to decrease the to lower the percentage of votes for his party of the socialists. So we had an interesting kind of indirect competition between two political leaders as such. But I think this is a question of actually of internal democracy within the parties, and it's a problem that will not solve if actually the parties will not willing to be more transparent and be more inclusive in the decisions that they take, and not to only fake the process of electing a leader of the leading body of the party. On the second question, I think in Moldova, in order to ensure the correctness of the electoral process, what you need is to counter the vote buying and the electoral corruption, which is widespread in the country, especially with the vote buying from the Transnistria region. Even now, during the parliamentary elections, we had around 2% of votes coming from the Transnistria region, coming from people living and residing in the Transnistria region. And Moldova cannot or doesn't have the control over this region. But what we usually can see, and the electoral observers are mentioning this after all the elections, is that usually there is a party, there is a political leader who is going to ensure via his informal channels with the leaders of the separatist region to ensure the vote buying of around 20 to 30,000 of voters coming from that region. So it's a very simple process. Someone from a party is good, or some representatives of some friends of a party is going to that region, and they have some money in order to buy, just votes from that region. People are coming with buses. An enormous or unprecedented number of people are coming during the day of the elections from that region to the villages or the cities across the administrative line, and they just majority of them actually vote only with one party who is actually corrupting them. So we need kind of to counter this very important issue. Another issue is, of course, is to ensure the voting rights of the diaspora. Diaspora in Moldova or people in the Moldovan diaspora is around 25 to 40% of the Moldovan population. The diaspora is very big. At the same time, they keep very strong links with the Moldovan residing population, and that's why you need to ensure their voting rights. And that's what we need to do, and we need to make some steps in this direction, and maybe, for example, approve and implement alternative voting systems if we want actually to increase the participation of people in the electoral process and so on. So these are only two issues, for example, that we need to keep in mind. But of course, another one is the integrity and independence of the electoral bodies, the Central Electoral Commission, but also the courts. And without that, you cannot have actually a complete, fair, and transparent electoral process in the country. And maybe the third question, I think the first question is not so much addressed to me and maybe to the other panelists. And maybe I'll stop here and offer the floor to Theo.
Teona, would you like to take over?
Yes. As for the voting tradition or habit in Georgia, I would say that the party ideology that makes attractive parties in the eyes of voters, mainly in the consolidated democracies, doesn't work in Georgia, unfortunately, because parties are mostly leadership oriented and people, population vote for the parties just because for the leader, I would say. And at the same time, as Berdin has mentioned, the voting against the leader is also common in Georgia, because a so-called protest voting we have seen from 2012, because all elections, we can say that it's against United Nations movement, right? So I think, yeah, people mostly vote for the leaders or against leaders in Georgia. And it's far from the democratic tradition.
Okay. Would you like to respond to the other questions as well?
If you mean the first person threshold, yes, it was good. I would say that this threshold was really good for little parties, small parties, or newly established parties. And I would say that in 2017's local elections, local self-government elections, many small parties used the possibility to enter the government. So that was really good for the little small parties, not the established one. And what was the yeah, as for the recommendations, I would say that the lower threshold is always good for political parties, but I think that the most important in order to enhance the political processes is political will to conduct the elections properly without any election irregularities. Because, for instance, in Georgia, in 2020's parliamentary elections, also many small parties use the possibility to got seats in the parliament, but they boycotted the parliament because of the controversial results of elections. So I think that's maybe mobilization of the civil society and activists to strengthen political will of government in order to commit and fulfill the electoral reforms.
Thank you. We do have a little bit time. If there is anybody willing to comment live or ask a question live, I do not see any hands.
There is a question in the chat box.
There is a question in the chat box, okay. Let's take a look at it. Sorry for my technical issues. Yes. So we are critical in our own state, and it is difficult for us to see prospects for recovery. What are the strengths of each state in particular, and what could be indicated as progress lately? Could you suggest a few chapters of common interest that should be supported by the European Union and other democratic partners in order to finally consolidate the region, respectively, the three countries as a whole? This is a great question about looking forward, because indeed we have a number of challenges that are repeating, but where do we go from here? This is one question, and I would like to add to it as well, to what extent is democratization linked to Europeanization in your countries in general? Is it considered to be part of integration to the EU, or is it a goal on its own? Let's have one more round of responses, and then we will probably conclude the event. Vardine, would you like to go again, the first? Please.
Yes. Okay. So I guess it is true that we kind of tend to see the negatives and the problems and shortcomings and work on them, but I'm probably one of the few people that think these elections that were held on June 20 were, I would even say, better than the ones that were held in 2018. The 2018 elections, the snap elections following the revolution, were kind of the cleanest elections that we had ever, but it was because there basically were no challenges. There were no problems. Everything was clear. The results were clear. There wasn't any intention or anything that would get in the way. So it was kind of basically consolidating what was done by the revolution. It was there was nothing major, no challenges at all. So these elections had a lot of challenges, and to me, being able to hold the elections again to the higher democratic standards was a great challenge that was overcome by the government. I'm hoping that the investigations into the violations will continue. We currently today actually we had the first sitting of the new parliament, and it was interesting to see the opposition parties applaud to their members, the new members of parliament that are now in prison because of vote buying and some other violations they did during the campaign period. So it's just a ridiculous thing how we kind of, and how like the standards for, and they consider them, of course, political prisoners. So like the standards for political prisoners have come to this law when vote buying and electoral violations are considered political actions, not crimes. And they think that these people should be considered political prisoners. So I'm really hoping that the investigation into all these cases will actually be carried out in a manner that will be consistent with democratic standards. And I'm hoping that the violations that have been revealed also by our observation missions and different things, and because we have a lot of evidence, especially when it comes to polling stations, because of the recording and everything, I'm hoping that this will be a boost for future reforms, and it will not stop there. So this was the first time that we actually saw the political will in action, when we saw vote buying being investigated and revealed right away, and hopefully it did not affect it. Like we wouldn't be able to say how much it affected the results, because of course there is some impact that it does have, but hopefully it did not impact in a way that would make Armenia go back to the former habits of vote buying and other things. So I'm really hoping we're on the way. It seems that for the current government, and especially for civil society, it was a challenge to kind of insist that democracy is not an alternative to security. This is how it was being presented last year, that we need to choose security over democracy, that these two are not mutually exclusive, and that we're able to see democracy as an internal issue, as an internal value, not as an international requirement or something that is put on us from outside, but actually as a domestic matter that needs to be handled, and of course that needs to be cherished. Because we also see in established democracies that sometimes democracy was taken for granted. And then we see this well-established countries struggling to get back to the democratic values they had before. We have a long way to go. One of the sure ways to get there is continuing the reforms. and continuing their reforms in an inclusive manner, learning both from our mistakes and from the mistakes that, or like from the practices that are being taught by the international community and partners. And since this is, I guess, last thing I'm saying, I wanted to thank you again for this opportunity, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
I will give you one last round before we close the event. So, but very short one, so that's fine. And now let's give floor to Mihai to also respond. What could be the positives in this process?
Well, I think that maybe the most important common interest for all the three countries is related to maybe strengthening the resilience of the internal institutions of the key institutions in Moldova, Armenia, and Georgia. And I'm speaking here especially and including the electoral ones, because we are talking about elections. And without consolidating, without ensuring that these institutions are truly independent, that they are not affected by some interests coming from oligarchs, kleptocrats, and so on, the democracy as such will not function properly. Also, resilience is also about the external negative influence that our countries receive, or maybe are affected by in the last years. This is also a factor that we need to keep into account, that without actually countering the external threats, the hybrid war that is so much focused on the region, and and hybrid instruments that are developed by Russia in order to impact, in order to influence, for example, the results of the elections in these countries, the democratic processes in these countries. You'll not be able to ensure the a full functional state in the Eastern Partnership that can be, and a full functional government that is able to deliver results for the citizens, because at any moment you can expect that a provocation may begin in some region of your country, and all the reforms that you are trying to implement could not have the end goal that the government is willing to achieve. So that's very important. I think that the national security of these three countries as such, being seen from a resilience point of view, is a theme of common interest. And I think that here the European Union could do much more than is doing right now. And I think that security shouldn't be a word that some member states in the EU are afraid of, speaking about, because it involves also, to some extent, a confrontation, an indirect confrontation with Russia. We need to speak freely about how important is the national security, and not only related to the conflict zones for our states. And to your second question, I think that democracy is very much needed for the citizens. I think that they understood how important are, for example, the elections for the modernization and the Europeanization of the countries, of our countries. I think that the electorate is changing in the last years, and we can see this change because the old generation that was, taught to live in a dictatorial regime with without freedoms, without chance to speak about their issues, is right now replaced by people who are much more free and that have other values and that respect, especially the European values. And I think that this actually brings into the question some teams, some debates that are already took place in the EU about the right, for example, to protest, the right to maybe the independence of the civil society and the organization of people in different groups in order to fight for the rights, the activism at the local level, at the regional level, not only in the big cities and so on. And I think that all these themes are actually more actual right now in these countries than a few years ago. And that's why maybe democracy is not anymore about some European ideals, European values. It's about what you are doing in your own community, in your own region, and so on. And that's also related to the fact that some part of our societies right now actually living abroad. They moved abroad, but they also keep some strong links with the relatives at home. And they send some messages from time to time that you need to empower yourself and be more active.
Thank you, Mihai. I have promised Vardine one more intervention because I wanted to ask about the regional aspect and what we can learn from each other. But I think Mihai has rounded it up already quite nicely. I will not ask you to repeat yourself. Teana, could you please also now take the floor to answer this question and touch upon the regional aspect? What commonalities, similarities, or lessons do you see in Georgia, Armenia, and Moldova, especially after today's discussion?
Yes, I think it's very good question, and I have already mentioned the issue of political will in my presentation, and I think that the countries like Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia, like the transitional countries, always have the problem of political will, and this problem is mainly reflect in the reforming process when the legislations or amendments are just embodied on the de jure level and not de facto. So I think that the international partners should pay much attention what is doing in reality, not on the sheets, so-called. So that would be serious help from them, and I would say that would contribute to the improvement of our countries.
Okay, and Vardine, would you like to add a little bit to it? What do you think do we have in common among Georgia, Armenia, and Moldova when it comes to elections, challenges, and the ways to address those challenges?
I think the biggest challenge is actually that we're trying to be democratic, unlike other countries in our region. So that's already a challenge. That's already something that is not shared by the neighbors and is problematic. And it seems that in this case, the most obvious instrument is the association agreements or SEPA agreement in Armenia's case, that does have a political component that is very important. I would say there is a lot of work to be done in the electoral administration aspect. This is something that is being overlooked when you look at it from kind of the broader perspective. You don't really see that the reforms, even if they're put on paper, actually, yes, when they go down to implementation, the electoral administration or management bodies are the ones that are going to implement it, and then it somehow gets lost on the way. So this is something that needs to be done. It's very critical to have the right people doing the right reforms. You probably can never achieve anything if you have just the goodwill. The goodwill is important, political will is very important, but then these reforms actually need to be taken through. So it seems that as we move closer to the goals that we have for establishing democracy, the challenges become stronger. And when we speak about this is on paper and this is how it should go, and then when it comes to the actual implementation, we see there are so many problems. And then the fact that we all are basically seeing that the reforms that we're going through are still not perfect, still need to be worked on. We still need to have each other's support and share experiences, make sure our electoral administration bodies are cooperating, working together, and that they're also working with the European partners. And it seems what we also have, what is probably not common in Europe, is the fact that we have so many regulations, so many detailed regulations, and then somehow something doesn't work. It seems that we need to find this balance of overruling everything and then actually making it work, because there has to be some golden, because to me, our side of the world is kind of looking at reforms and other things in a way that we're always expecting that some laws are going to be violated, and we need to do something to prevent the violation. You know, when we look at the European experience, it always comes from the goodwill. You know, the people are going to do the right thing, so we need to do something to encourage that or something else. So there has to also be some change in the mindset and in the way that we're looking at the reforms, and in the way that the society in general is also ready to accept that the political parties are ready to accept the rules as something that is going to benefit them in the long run, and not something that is going to be beneficial for them just to win these elections on a local level or national level.
So it seems that, well, the implementation of elections reforms and their outcomes, it's an ongoing process. It's a long process, even though some of the changes have been accepted and snap elections, right, were held, or changes in the legislation has been implemented in all three countries. What would be very useful to see, if I could add as well, from the international partners, this ongoing monitoring of the elections linked to the association agreements or SEPA, because it does cover democracy, and there hasn't been as rigorous monitoring of its implementation so far as it could be, and it's something that we have been also promoting and also contributing to ourselves, so that the changes that have been promised actually do get implemented, and in an inclusive manner with all parties involved and partners of civil society involved. So I would like to thank the panelists. I would like to thank also the organizers, the Analytical Center of Globalization and Regional Cooperation, and all the participants who attended this discussion till the very end. Thank you for being with us, for your questions, participation. It was a pleasure seeing you. And we will be sharing with you the publications published by today's speakers in the near future, and also we'll be inviting you in the series of similar discussions throughout the year, and hope to see you there. Thank you very much, and till the next meetings.